Hello, hello, hello. Hey, so just if you're noticing, all we're doing right now is talking about how we're going to apply what you have already learned about or already been taught about fractions, but now we're applying the rules of integers. So what we're going to be talking about today is going to be adding, subtracting rational numbers. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be utilizing what we think you've already been taught. Not that you've learned it, but been taught it about adding and subtracting rational numbers, and we're going to add in what we did with adding and subtracting integers. Okay, so we're going to make the rational numbers positive and negative, whereas before you've not done that. Okay, here we go. Okay, here is where you need to use that hundreds chart. Hope you got it done by now. Okay? You've had plenty of time to get it done. If you don't have it done, you're going to work harder. It's going to take longer. Okay? Because in that assignment, we talked about finding the LCM, right? And that's what you have to do to add these two rational numbers. Now, I can go through and show you why. And maybe I'll create a separate video of just adding and subtracting rational numbers for those of you that don't get it. Right? Because there's still 4 out of 3 people still struggle with fractions. But here's what we're going to do. We need to find the least common denominator. And so if we look at 8 and 5, 8 factors out to be 2 times 2 times 2. 5 is just 1 times 5. What do they have in common? Remember, what we talked about is you're going to take the greatest common factor times whatever's left over. Well, this one, what's left over, they have nothing in common. These are called relatively prime numbers, right? They're relatively prime. The only thing they have in common is a 1. So that means we're going to take 1 times whatever's left over. Well, everything's left over, so it's going to be 8 times 5. So that's 40. What that means is when we look at this, we have to take this and multiply this by 8 over 8. And we got to multiply 3/8 by 5 over 5. What that's going to give me is 15 40ths plus negative 24 40ths. Now is when I have to do my integer math. So now is when you draw that number line out. And you say, well, I'm starting at 15 and I'm adding negative 24, which means I'm going this way because this is over 40, right? Because now they both have the same denominator. So all I'm doing is figuring out what 15 plus negative 24 over 40 is. So I'm going to add negative 24, which means I wind up on negative 9. So this is going to be negative 9 40ths. So remember, Bernoulli's prophecy. Most often common mistake is going to be dropping the negative, not simplifying the fraction. 1, don't drop that negative. Don't make it 9 40ths. 2, make sure you break out your hundreds chart. 9 is 3 times 3. 40 is 2 times 2 times 2 times 5. They have nothing in common. This doesn't simplify. That's your answer. Okay, so what you had to do is you had to find a common denominator. And then once you change them to be the same size pieces, they both took 40 to make a whole. Okay, once you did that, then you could add the numerator. And then you could do the integer math to add the numerators, come up with your solution, and then check it to see if it can simplify. That's what you did. Okay, now let's move on to another one. We look at this one now, right? Okay, now there's some things we talked about that if you look at this, when you have negative 7/9 minus a negative, just say you had negative 7 minus negative 2. What would you do? And I've by now shown you that, look, that's 2 eyes and a nose. Because we get the same result if we take negative 7 plus the positive, right? The inverse of 2. So that's going to be plus positive 2/15. Well, so now I can just rewrite this as negative 7/9 plus 2/15. but I still have to do the fraction math. Okay, so I still have to change this. So I can rewrite that. That's the first thing. Now then what I have to do is say I'm going to find the LCM. That's the second thing I do, find the least common multiple or the lowest common denominator. Notice the words. Least and lowest. They mean the same thing, don't they? Common and common. Well, those are the same words. And the multiples are the denominator. It has to be the least common multiple of the denominators. Okay, so we look at the denominators. And that's going to be 9 and 15. And 9 is 3 times 3. 15 is 3 times 5. What do they have in common? They both have a 3 in common. So we take the greatest common factor, which is 3, times whatever's left over, which is 3 and 5. And that means 45. So we got to change these to 40/5. Both of them have to be into 40/5. And then we can add those. If we look, 15 times 3 is 45, which means I'm going to multiply this one times 3 over 3. 2/15, which is going to give me 6/45. Remember, 3 over 3 is 1. We're just changing the way it looks, just like you guys did on Halloween, right? And then if I look at 9, okay, 9 times 5 is 45. So that means I'm going to multiply this by 5 over 5, which means I'm going to get negative 35/45. Don't simplify it. Okay, you did this on purpose because now what you want to say is, look, these are all over 45. And now what I'm going to have is negative 35 plus 6/45. Now I got to do the integer math. Okay, so now I got to look over here and say, well, if I started at negative 35 and I added 6, I'd go that way 6, which means I'm going to be at negative 29. So this equals negative 29/45. Now, I know that 29 is a prime number. You look at your hundreds chart, you know 29 is a prime number. And it doesn't go into 45. These two numbers, 29 and 45, is relatively prime. This is your solution, negative 29/45. Okay, so let's look at what we did. Okay, we looked at this and said, first, we're going to figure out, what are our denominators? We're going to look at the math, right? Well, what are we doing with the math? So that's the second thing we did. We looked and said, okay, we're going to have negative 7/9 plus 2/5. Then what we did was the third thing we did was find the least common multiple between 9 and 15. Then we converted, right? Then the fourth thing we did was we converted these over to be the same denominator. Then the fifth thing we did was we wrote it out, and then we did the sixth thing we did was do the math, the integer math of the numerators, and then the seventh thing we did was write it out, make sure we had the right sign, and seeing if we could simplify it. That's it. A lot of steps, but it just makes it more steps to do. It doesn't make it harder than anything you've done. If you did well in adding and subtracting integers, well, then the hard part, the new part is over. The hard part is probably the fractions, because after all, 4 out of 3 people struggle with fractions. Okay, what's hard about this one? How are these two the same? How are they different? So you would probably say the first thing is they're the same because they're fractions, and we're adding them. We can already see we're adding them, right? We're adding, but now the hard part is these are mixed numbers, and we can't do much with those. you you know, there's a way to do this with it, but I'm going to show you one way, and then I don't know if I'm going to have time to show you the other way, but I'm going to see if you guys come up with another way to do this. There is another way to do this. I'm going to make these usable fractions. So let's convert these two into usable fractions. Get negative 28. Oh, don't forget that negative. Negative 21 eighths plus negative 23 sixths. Okay, so that was our first step, right? Once I've made these usable fractions, now I'm just doing the same thing I did over here. Okay, first thing I'm going to do, recognize I have an addition, so I've already written it as addition. It's been written as addition. Now, one of the things I might do is say, oh, you know what? When I'm adding a negative, it just gets more negative. That means I'm going to have a negative, and all I'm really doing is adding the numerators. But now what I got to do is convert. So I got to look at 8 and 6. Say what 8 is 2 times 2 times 2, and 6 is 2 times 3. What do they have in common? They have a 2 in common. That's it. We take the greatest common factor, which is 2, not 4. It's 2. Okay. If you did that worksheet, you got enough practice at it. That should be simple. And then what we're going to do is multiply that times the 2 times 2 and times the 3. That's 8 times 3. 24 is the least common multiple, which means 24. We're going to make both of these into 24ths. Okay. Let just go ahead and make these both the same color so we know. And then what we're going to do is look at it and say, well, what would this be? What do we have to multiply 8 times? And again, like I said, you just go look at this, say 8 times whatever left over on the 6. That's going to be 3. So I'm going to multiply the 8 by 3 over 3. 3 times 8 is 24. That's a given. 3 times 21 is going to be 63. Okay, so now what I got to do is figure out what this numerator is. So what do I multiply 6 times? Okay, so I'm going to take 6 times whatever's left over on the 8 when it has 2 as a common factor. There's 4 left over. So I got to multiply 6 times 4 to get 24. So I got to multiply the top times 24 also. 24 times 4, 23 times 4 is going to be 92. Okay, so what that means is I've got them all over 24, right? Now I just got to rewrite this. This is going to be negative 63 plus negative 92 over 24. That means I got to do the integer math, right? So I'm at negative 63. I add negative 92. I'm going that way, right? It's 63. It's going to give me negative 155. So I'm going to have negative 155 over 24. Okay, so now what I got to do is, I know it's negative, right? It's a big negative. If I look, I know that's 24 is about 25, and 155 is about 150. So 25 goes into 150 6 times. So this should be negative 6. Negative 6 times 20, or 6 times 24 is 120 plus 24, 144. That means I'm going to have 144 plus 11 equals 155. So I'm going to have negative 6 and 11 24ths. And I know 11's prime, it won't go into it, so there I am done. A lot of steps, huh? Lot of steps. But even though this is a lot of steps, notice that the steps are nothing we haven't already done. We talked about least common multiples, greatest common factors. We talked about adding integers and subtracting integers. And we're going over the fractions. The new stuff is the integer math. The rest of it's stuff you've seen before. You just have to figure out. Okay, why don't you try this one and this one, and let's see if you can get these two right. Come to class. I'm gonna put the answers up here in a minute. You come to class and see if you got the right answer, and if you didn't, come to class and see if you can figure out what you need to do to fix that. Okay, so hit pause, do these two, and let's see how you do. Okay, so here's your two solutions. Should have gotten 1 and 1/12 and 2 and 1/36. Okay, if you got those answers, here's the question. When you look at this that I did over here, how could you have done this one different? And, we'll talk about these other ones in class. Okay? All right. Good luck.